Welcome, everyone. I'm Jennifer Shue, and I'm chairperson of Sustainable Ringwood's Green Team. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you today to a presentation offered by Sustainable Ringwood Green Team in conjunction with the Ringwood Public Library. Today's presentation is supported by a grant from Sustainable Jersey to Sustainable Ringwood's Green Team and a grant by the New Jersey Historical Commission to the Ringwood Public Library. For a long time, landscaping has meant carefully manicured lawns and gardens. For the most part, plants for the garden were selected for their color and/or shape, as well as lighting, soil, and moisture preferences. Plants were primarily intended to complement a well-tended lawn. Very little thought was given to supporting insects, pollinators, birds, or the general health of the ecological system that encompasses our lawn and garden. But our garden and lawn are part of the local environment, and we should be selecting plants that will support the overall health of our local ecosystem. I'm extremely pleased to introduce Tina Yee, garden designer and horticulturist, who will tell us more about how we can engage in environmentally healthy landscaping in her presentation on native plants and ecologically based garden practices. Please welcome today's speaker, Tina Yee.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm Tina Yee. I own and operate a small garden design and garden maintenance company called Blue Cabin Gardens. I am a graduate of the horticulture internship program at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, where I was a student of traditional ornamental horticulture and regenerative gardening techniques. While at the BBG, I spent a lot of time in the native flora garden, learning about the incredible diversity of native plants, the conditions for their survival, and the relationship between native plant species and their pollinators. It is because of these mutualistic relationships, along with the continued development of wildlands, that it has become essential to plant more native plants in home gardens and public landscapes, and to practice garden techniques that support a biodiverse wildlife. What is a native plant? So a native plant is one that has adapted over time, thousands of years in a particular region or ecosystem. They are the foundation of a healthy ecosystem. They provide food and habitat to native wildlife. Even though we have here in northern New Jersey very large areas of preserved parks and wildland, the reality is that these wild places are too few and far between, that it has become impossible to sustain the populations of native bees, insects, and butterflies and birds, etc., without community action. The good news is that we can make a big difference if we give some of the space in our home gardens back to the wild by planting natives suitable for the conditions in your garden and by practicing ecological horticulture. So this is a native plant called Amsonia, or blue star threadleaf. It's a perennial. It's got a broadly rounded habit. When it's mature, it becomes more shrub-like and more striking with age. And the mature plants can reach a height of 4 feet and even have a 4-foot spread. And the leaves on the Amsonia they have a very dreamy and frothy appearance. The blue star-shaped flowers come in late May and June. And it's beautiful in fall too when it turns gold. So that's just one of our native plants here that I really love. Why are native plants so important? So it's clear that no organism exists in isolation. Native plants and wildlife have co-evolved together throughout time. They share an evolutionary history. Most insects are host specialists and have evolved to need a certain plant to reproduce and vice versa. Some flowers will depend on that specialist insect for its own pollination. Some pollinating insects will emerge from their dormancy when their host plants begin to flower. It's the beauty of evolution. So if we want diversity in our wildlife, we will need diversity in our plantings. The right plant and right place, that just means that when the plant is in its preferred soil and light conditions, it's in the right place. While it's very important to be diligent about watering properly after first planting any plant, once established, a native plant would not require much watering if it's in its suitable conditions. Native plants have adapted along with every other animal and insect to the environmental factors of that area throughout time. For example, in this relationship between the native chelone or white turtlehead and the bumblebee. This flower has an upper lip that arches over the lower lip, and it takes a very strong pollinator to get in there to reap the nectar reward, which can be significant because only bumblebees and occasionally hummingbirds can manage to get in there. So the amount of nectar is usually worth the effort. There really is nothing cuter than to see a little bumblebee butt hanging out of the chelone flower. I saw a stand of white turtleheads late last summer over by the Swan Pond at the Botanic Garden in Ringwood. They get tall, about 4 feet sometimes, and they like evenly moist conditions and sun or part sun. The landscape is divided into small isolated pieces, which is the primary cause of the decline in global biodiversity. This has been called habitat fragmentation. What we're trying to create with our home gardens is a biological corridor or a safe passageway. This is a place for wildlife to reproduce, live, and move. If we do this, we will be restoring viable habitat within our human-dominated landscapes. We want to support life in our home gardens. Planting with native plants is crucial. Native wildlife needs native plants. Nurseries have stocked European and Japanese exotic species for many years because they are generally not bothered by local wildlife. Your garden is a place where biology happens. If nothing is eating leaves of your plants, your garden is not a part of the ecosystem. Home gardens and healthy plantings start with good soil health, and good soil health is all about putting back into the soil what it needs, and what it needs is compost or decomposed plant material. I encourage everyone to compost. There are many ways to do it, and you can find one that works for you. Native plants help to conserve water in the home landscape, and if they are appropriately sited, they often require little to no irrigation once established. Native plants are highly efficient at sequestering and absorbing carbon through photosynthesis and moving it deep into the roots to be released and trapped in the soil. So the bigger the root system, the more carbon is trapped. Native prairie plants are known for this. When your garden is beautiful, you will be called to sit with your plants and enjoy it. Experiencing the natural world is crucial for our well-being. So there's 915 million acres of agricultural land in this country. This is 2/5 of all the land. The land is characterized, agricultural land is characterized by monocultures, or one kind of plant for miles. And when you grow the same plant in huge pieces of land, it becomes susceptible to pests and diseases. The commercial agricultural industry uses an enormous amount of pesticides and synthetic fertilizer, which creates high levels of chemical runoff. This land does not support wildlife. So regarding lawns, turf lawns take up 40 million acres of land in the United States. This is as large as the size of New England. Perfect lawns are not as healthy as they may appear. Many of them are locked in a cycle of chemical dependence. So they're often cut too short, and those grasses are susceptible to fungal diseases and pests. Then they're treated with chemicals to kill the fungus. That damages the lawn by harming healthy microbial and fungal life in the soil. Often the lawns are also over-fertilized, and we know if you over-fertilize the lawn, the grass cannot absorb all of those nutrients, and they are leached into the surrounding soil and waterways. On the Ringwood Library website, there's a very good video with Dr. William T. Lubick from Rutgers University on environmentally sound lawn care practice. Please check it out. It's very good. Okay. This is a front yard pollinator garden that I designed in Franklin Lakes, not all natives, but an example of how you can shrink the lawn and create a beautiful garden with useful plants. A large oak fell here during a storm, so it was an opportunity to create something new with the new full sun conditions. It's nice to choose plants that flower alternately throughout the season, so there's always something to look at, and so that there's always a good food source available for pollinators. We could have just seeded the area with turf grass, but instead we opted to shrink the lawn a little bit. This is an area with a lot of deer pressure, so I had to use plants that that could deter, well, not really deter because they're just everywhere, but I had to use plants that they really didn't like, and even then they started eating those lilacs and everything. But yeah, anyway. So some examples of native plants that deer generally do not browse are echinacea, which is the pink in the left, on the upper left, yarrow in the bottom left, that's yarrow. Scarlet bee balm is the middle plant. Nodding onion is up on the top right, and liatris or blazing stars on the bottom right. So if you're in the garden center and you're wondering if the plant you love and want to buy is deer resistant, look to see if the foliage or flowers if they're roughly textured or spiky like holly leaves. Also, deer don't like plants with strong fragrance like nodding onions or wild bergamot. Anything in the mint family is something usually they don't like to browse those things, those plants. Another garden practice that is so important to native insects is leaving the leaves. Showing restraint doesn't mean neglect. You'll save a lot of time and energy by not bagging up all of that precious organic material. The leaves are a natural mulch, which insulates plant roots and then decomposes decompose to build up living soil. All leaves and dead plant material provide a cover for many overwintering insects. Waiting until the weather gets above 50 degrees for a few days and nights is best before you really start to clean up. This year I waited quite a while, probably like the end of April. The native bees will find cover at night under the leaf litter if it gets too cold for them. So even if the daytime is in the 50s and higher, at night it gets to be in the 30s and that's too cold. So they'll need some place to hide in that leaf litter. Woolly bear caterpillars, or what becomes the woolly bear moth, survives or the Isabella tiger moth, which is in the upper right-hand corner, survives the winter by freezing solid in the leaf litter. The North American Luna moth, which is in the bottom right, their eggs are laid on persimmons, white birches, hickories, and sweet gum trees. They form a chrysalis and drop down into the leaf litter where they overwinter and emerge the next spring after they've grown into their adult form. They are a favorite food of bats. At the bases of plants, there's a layer of decomposing organic material. This is called the duff layer. This natural mulch is what your plants want to grow in. It provides food to microorganisms that in turn feeds the plants. The duff layer is necessary for many beneficial insects. When you clean it away, you're essentially removing a lot of life. The organic matter in the soil also stores up large amounts of carbon. During the winter months, if you leave the seed heads and stems up, you are creating beautiful winter landscapes, but you're also allowing the insects, especially native bees, to lay eggs to overwinter in the hollow stems of some of your garden's perennials. The upright stems and seed heads add architectural interest. It looks way better than a clear cut, in my opinion. If you need to do a little cleaning of the heads, like they're flopping over, not filled in just yet, you can cut a little. But shake the seeds onto the ground so that they can become part of the seed bank and be available for food for birds and other small animals. Observe for emerging insects and cut off the tops to about 15 to 18 inches above the ground. If you want to add material to the duff layer, you can cut the stems into 1 or 2 inch pieces and leave them there at the base of the plant. If you want a bit of a neater look, you can make your cuts a little further down at the front of the bed. Or if you have a lot of crossing branching, you could cut the ones that have flopped, leaving the others that stand up. That looks natural and intentional. The new growth will eventually hide the old stem stumps. I like to think about how the plants will look in all seasons, especially winter, because it can be so crucial to have something to look at and enjoy when you're in the depths of the cold winter months. When you're doing your cleanup, observe and watch out for overwintering chrysalises, partially grown caterpillars are curled up in leaves. There are microscopic eggs on plant materials all throughout these early spring moments in the garden beds. So not that you'll be able to see everything and save everything, but it's enough to just be aware of this. Leave rotting stumps and logs for bees to nest in if you have a place out of the way or in the back of your garden. Bees are also nesting at the bases of grasses, so leave them and try not to step on them. Showing restraint doesn't mean that the garden has to look neglected. I think we can get to a place where a more natural landscape is normalized. So there's a lot of dangers in over-fertilizing your lawns and gardens, and it's very easy to do. The fertilizers are very strong and usually over-applied. The plant roots are not able to absorb all those extra nutrients, and they are leached out into the soil and into the streams, rivers, and lakes, contaminating the water. Algae bloom is the result of high nitrogen fertilizer being leached out into the waterways. This unintended consequence creates a hazardous situation for people and animals. You can have a healthy, vigorous lawn by just mowing less with a higher cut, about 3 inches, and leaving the clippings where they lay on the lawn to break down and add nitrogen. So the best way for a plant to get nutrients is slowly. There isn't much of a need to add more fertilizer to your garden beds if you add a good layer of compost in the spring or fall. Creating healthy soils rich in organic matter is totally sufficient. Try not to think of the insects as pests and think of them as resources. They are a link in the chain. When you spray for one insect, like ticks or mosquitoes, you are not just killing them. So there will be, in turn, a decline in predator population of that species. Pesticides wipe out beneficial insects and larvae, which upsets the balance and puts you in that cycle of dependence. We can do things to deter mosquitoes, like using plants that deter them. These would be plants in the geranium family, a lot in the geranium family, like citronella. Salvia is also a really good mosquito deterrent, any kind of sage. Okay, so if you see aphids on your plants, which that is the smaller insect is the aphid in the slide, and that's like the favorite food for lady beetles. If you see aphids on your plants, wait it out. Eventually, the lady beetles will come through. Lady beetles are one of those beneficial predators we want to see more of. Neonicotinoids. Okay. These are systemic pesticides, which are used throughout the nursery trade, but less so now because they are so dangerous. Systemics are absorbed through the root system and the vascular structure of the plant and will kill insects that attempt to eat it. Systemic pesticides get into the system of the plant, making the pollen, nectar, and other parts of the plant toxic to insects. Imagine planting a butterfly milkweed in your garden to attract monarchs, only to poison them as they feed. Neonicotinoids, or neonics, have been outlawed in Europe, and I hope that happens here as well. A great way to get the growers to stop using them is to mention it at your local garden center. Always ask if they have plants grown without neonics. A lot of plants that I've been seeing in the nurseries now They actually have a sticker that says no neonics. So they're advertising it now, promoting it, which is great. Wildlife habitats don't have to feel wild. Repeating colors and forms will give a sense of rhythm to the bed. 1 or 2 more widths of mowed, manicured lawn area gives the feeling of care, demonstrating intention and not neglect. To cut down on maintenance, cleaning up and weeding the fronts of the beds gives a sense of order and neatness. In the spring, you can cut back a bit lower in the fronts too, while leaving the back of the bed a bit more full and less maintained. It's all about perception. Okay, so this is what we just went through, and a word on tilling and soil health, because we didn't really talk that much about that, but anytime you're digging into the soil, it's a disturbance. Gardening itself is a disturbance, but we can limit the harm we do. Anytime soil structure is disturbed or fully tilled, you will get immediate results, but there's a reason for that. The tilling process turns soil and kills microorganisms, which releases nitrogen and fertilizes. But this is temporary, and the soil structure is damaged during this process. Microbes that build soil structure live on roots and eat dead and decaying organic matter, either from surface plant residues or dead roots. Some soil fauna includes springtails, mites, nematodes, earthworms, ants, insects, bacteria, fungi, and algae. Okay, so when my family and I moved here, we were so amazed at the variety of birds we would see in our backyard. I thought how great it would be to see the New Jersey state bird, the goldfinch. They love to feed on the seeds of echinacea. So I planted more echinacea. And then last year I was visited by about 5 or 6 goldfinches, all on the echinacea seeds. They were having a great time. That's great. So we can move around to suit our needs, but for native wildlife, this is their only home. Keystone plants help build complex food webs. They make the biggest difference. Native plants and insects form the essential foundation that provides food for other organisms, directly and indirectly. Including keystone plants in managed ecosystems will help restore insect diversity and support animals that need insects to survive. The majority of all insect herbivores, like caterpillars, are specialized to feed on just 1 or a few host plants. Caterpillars are critical baby food for 95% of all young songbirds for the first month or 2 of their lives. Caterpillars are sacks of nutrients for baby birds. A very efficient way to transfer the energy of the sun and plants to birds. They make the most of the plant matter. Eastern white oak. It's a top keystone tree. Sun to part sun, it's very adaptable. It supports 537 native species. It's a huge amount of species of butterflies and moth caterpillars. The acorns are eaten by so much native wildlife. And soft landings is what I'm going to talk about. Instead of having turf grass under the oak, try a soft landing bed. Many of the moths and butterfly larvae that feed on oak trees must complete their life cycle in the duff and leaf litter near or beneath the tree, below the ground. So diverse native plantings under native trees provide critical shelter and habitat for 1 or more life cycle stages of many beneficial insects. The soft landings include leaf litter, duff, and plant debris. Creating soft landings invites many other beneficials, including fireflies, lacewings, beetles. They all depend on soft landings for survival. So you're building healthy soil, providing food for songbirds and pollinators, sequestering more carbon than turf grass would, and reducing your time spent mowing. Oaks are easy to plant under. They have less aggressive surface roots than some, so they won't suck all the water and nutrients out of the soil surrounding the tree. Extend the bed out to the drip line of the tree, which is the outermost circumference of the tree canopy. Avoid big roots when you're digging, and don't add soil because you don't want to suffocate those roots. Use plants that can tolerate dry soil. The conditions under the tree canopy will be medium to dry. A variety of ground covers that you could use under there is, we have a native Pachysandra. It's not the Japanese species, but it's a really beautiful ground cover. Wild ginger is a great one. Pennsylvania sedge. There's many native ferns you can use, like hay-scented ferns, sensitive ferns, Christmas ferns. One of the first buds you'll see in spring are from the willows. They are an early nectar source for native bees, honeybees, bumblebees, and beneficial predatory insects. Willows grow relatively fast. This tree can get tall and wide. It's great for erosion control along stream banks, and it's a host plant for the viceroy, morning cloak, the eastern tiger swallowtail, the Acadian hairstreak, and the red spotted purple, all of those butterflies. The eastern white pine is also a keystone plant. It flourishes in a wide variety of wet to dry habitats. It prefers well-drained soil, it's tolerant of drought. It's not tolerant to pollution. It's frequently seen on the edges of lakes and ponds. It's the tallest of our native evergreens. There stood a white pine in the Adirondacks about 160 feet tall. One of the tallest in New York, however, it fell last year. Pines provide nesting sites and nesting materials for many native songbirds, including nuthatches, chickadees, and woodpeckers, and many more. The large cones produced by white pines contain an abundant crop of nutritious seed that are favored by black bear, rabbits, and squirrels. Nearly 40 species of birds eagerly consume these seeds. The soft blue-green foliage gives a nice, soft, diffused look in the garden. Native plants, shrubs, and perennials. Buttonbush, Cephalanthus occidentalis. It gets 16 to 15 feet tall and wide. It likes full sun. It flowers in June and August, between June and August. It's indigenous to open, wet areas and low woods. It's useful for erosion control. It has pin cushion blossoms that are composed of dense tubular flowers that are attractive to pollinators. I saw a nice stand of these growing next to the pond in Sterling Forest last year. It was growing with white turtlehead, clethra, and maple leaf viburnum, all really great natives. Arrowwood Viburnum, Viburnum dentatum. It grows in sun to part shade. It likes dry to wet soil conditions. It blooms from May to early June with clusters of creamy white flat top flowers for pollinators and to land on and feed on. It has dark blueberries in the fall. It has dark green foliage that turns yellow, wine red in fall. It provides food and cover and nesting sites for birds. Arrowwood Viburnum prefers a loamy, well-drained soil, but it can tolerate a range of soil types, including clay. It likes an acidic soil, though. This, I think, well, no, this isn't, but I like the variety Blue Muffin. It gets 5 to 7 feet tall and wide and has beautiful color berries. It's good if deer aren't a huge problem for you. It's not their first choice, but they will browse the flowers and berries. Trumpet vine. So this is full sun and drought tolerant. It flowers throughout the summer. It has that bright orange tubular flower that attracts hummingbirds. This plant colonizes by suckers and branching stems coming up from the base of the roots and layering. So for this reason, it's great for erosion control. Plant near concrete or an area where you can mow around it and keep it in check. I've seen it work beautifully covering a chain link fence. next to a sidewalk. So it's a vigorous climber. It can get 25 to 40 feet high and 5 to 10 feet wide. And it climbs via aerial rootlets. So there's no need to tie it to the fence. They damage walls, they get heavy. And so you don't want to plant it for that near a wall that you don't want to come down eventually. It has moderate deer resistance. Aquilegia. You'll start seeing columbines, the new leaves of the columbine in early April here, very early. It comes in a variety of colors these days. They are short-lived perennials. They come in, so they come in blues and light pinks. They come in a lot of colors. They are short-lived perennials, but they tend to walk around the garden. So allow movement and growth. Ostrich fern. These take part shade to full shade, and you can plant them about 3 feet apart. They get very big. They're very large and vase shaped. They get, like I said, like 3 feet. They're a good choice for stabilizing soils too, along shady stream banks. It likes moist soil conditions. This is a tall native plant, not a traditional ground cover, but I use it to fill in between trees and shrubs, and it easily spreads. The fiddleheads are edible. You can harvest them in spring when they're about 2 to 6 inches tall. Okay, hairy beard tongue is one of my favorites. It's got June to July blooms, very valuable to native bees, bumblebees, hummingbirds. They have those tubular flowers that hummingbirds get into. They self-seed in my garden, but they're not too crazy. They have beautiful flowers. And then the seed heads add a vertical element that works great in a cottage style setting. These are also called penstemon. So the famous butterfly milkweeds, they have co-evolved with monarchs. The monarch has adapted to the chemical defenses of the milkweed. Monarch caterpillars feed exclusively on milkweed. They're really long blooming all throughout the summer. Milkweed produces toxins called glycoside to deter animals from eating it. The monarch caterpillar will build up the toxin in their bodies and use it as a defense from predators. The orange color serves as a warning to predators of bad taste and toxicity. In fall, the seed pods open and the feathery seed heads are wind dispersed. And these silky threads that the seeds are attached to are favored by hummingbirds for nesting material. Hummingbirds are super fancy. Okay. Gray goldenrod. It self-seeds and spreads through underground rhizomes, but it's less aggressive than the tall goldenrods. It likes average or dry to medium dry, well-drained soil. It is a late season food source for birds and butterflies. This variety has graceful arching flower stems with a bright yellow color and gray-green leaves. The underappreciated, I think it's an underappreciated plant. It's often a scapegoat for allergies. A lot of people mistake this plant for ragweed, and it's not. New England aster gets tall. It's great in the back of the bed. It has showy, large, deep violet flowers. It self-seeds, but it's not too aggressive. It's a big food source for butterflies late in the season, and really beautiful. It's just, they get really tall too. I pinch them back in like around this time of year, like June, because they get a little floppy, and you can do that, or you can leave them natural. It's fine. Okay. These are some native spring ephemerals that I saw at when I was walking through the not the Botanic Garden, at the Manor, Ringwood Manor. So on the left, you'll see there's, this is a really beautiful native spring ephemeral called Dutchman's Breeches, Dicentra cucullaria. It's one of my favorites. So the spring ephemerals will come out before the trees have leafed out in the woods, and then they'll return back to the ground once they're shaded out. It's managing to grow in this huge field of vinca, which is kind of taking over there, but vinca can be very invasive. People like it, but it's invasive. In the middle, I saw yellow trout lily. Those are really beautiful. You'll find them near, this was a huge stand of trout lily near a little stream. And all the way to the right those are called pussitos, so cute. The flower is like a little cat paw coming up. And those were all near the graveyard, just because it hasn't been mowed down so low, you can experience those plants. How to find relief from eco-anxiety. Do one thing, right? Just keep doing one thing. Changing your entire landscape isn't necessary. Just one plant will have a huge impact. And before you know it, you've done a lot. So I believe in conservation by addition. So you just move the dial in the right direction and just keep doing that, and you'll make a huge difference. And you do what you can manage, and you can have ornamentals. You can plant a container. You can plant a garden in a container on a stoop. You can plant a house strip on a busy street. You could have big perennial beds and so on. The possibilities are endless. Just include native plants. And observe your plants. Just keep looking at everything and seeing what's happening. It's my favorite thing to do. Where to source native plants? Fortunately, many garden centers and nurseries are starting to see that there is a market for natives and are stocking more native plants every year. There are a lot of local native plant sales. So go to the Native Plant Society of New Jersey website. You can find resources there. Also, be okay with a plant that doesn't look perfect in the pot. Without extra fertilizers and pesticides, the plant isn't going to look huge and happy in the pot. It's just going to look like it's because they don't want to be in the pot. They want to be in the ground. So once you put it in the ground, and it's in the right place, it'll thrive and it will flourish. Doug Tallamy is an entomologist and conservationist and has written several books on the relationship between plants and insects, how native plants sustain wildlife, and how it is necessary in our time to create wildlife habitat in our home gardens. He has been a leader in this movement, and I encourage everyone to take a look at these books. Check out the Homegrown National Park project that he started. Insects are our friends, and we really need them. Thank you, Jennifer, for letting me do this. It was very fun.
Well, thank you, Tina. Thank you, Tina. This was a wonderful, informative presentation. I so appreciate all the work that you put into giving us all this wonderful information. On behalf of Sustainable Ringwood, the Green Team, and the Ringwood Public Library, I would once again like to thank you. It was tremendously informative. I'd like everyone to know that this presentation has been recorded and it will be available on the Ringwood Public Library website in their YouTube section. So look for it because you need to listen to it more than once. There's so much information. I started taking notes, but I realized I have to go back and listen to it again. If anyone would like to contact Tina for garden design or maintenance help, you can contact her at tina@bluecabingardens.com or visit her Instagram at the symbol at Blue Cabin Gardens. Tina, once again, thank you so much. This was just a wonderful presentation. And thank you everyone for attending.